Well, here's a fun one to start your week. A Linux server gets rooted. An attacker goes from random unprivileged user to owns the whole box in a single command. Your file integrity monitoring? Yeah, green across the board. Everything's fine. Nothing was touched on disk. Because nothing was touched on disk. Welcome to the Cybersecurity Whisperer. I'm Elliott Franklin, and this week the kernel learned a new trick. A market intelligence vendor you've never heard of took down half the security industry, and 100 universities found out that supported version only is doing a lot of heavy lifting in Oracle's advisory. So let's get into it. Well, let's talk about Klue. I mean, if you'd asked me to define Klue 2 weeks ago, I'd have guessed it was a board game where Colonel Mustard exfiltrates your Salesforce data in the library. Turns out, I wasn't far off. Klue is a Vancouver-based market intelligence platform, competitive intel software. They disclosed on June 19th that attackers stole data from their customers in an attack between June 11th and 12th, and the incident hit Klue's Salesforce integration. Here's the part that should make every one of you sit up. The attacker got in through a compromised legacy credential, used it to grab OAuth tokens that connected Klue to third-party platforms, which included Salesforce, and then walked into the customer data sitting in these connected environments. So who got hit? Well, this is the chef's kiss. The impacted companies included HackerOne, Huntress, OneTrust, and Snyk. Now read that list again. A bug bounty platform, a threat hunting company, a privacy and trust vendor, and an application security company. The people we pay to tell us how to not get breached got breached through a vendor's Salesforce connector because of one old credential that nobody rotated. Look, I am not laughing at them. I'm laughing because if it can happen to Huntress, though we'd never do that, energy in your own org is doing you no favors. The cybercrime group Icarus, maybe, they claimed responsibility and said it'll publish the data if the ransom, of course, isn't paid. Naming yourself Icarus is at least honest. You're telling me up front how this ends. So the lesson is not Klue that Klue is bad. The lesson is the shape of the attack. One legacy credential, OAuth tokens, a trusted integration that already had a permission slip into everyone's Salesforce. The attacker never had to break into HackerOne. They just had to break into something HackerOne had already said yes to. And again, as we say, that's your supply chain, not the vendor's brochure, the OAuth grant you approved 18 months ago and, of course, forgot about. Well, quick aside, because this Klue thing is the, third or fourth time this year we've watched the same movie, Salesforce, Salesloft Drift, Snowflake, the pattern keeps repeating and the common thread is OAuth tokens and third-party connections. Let's think about OAuth tokens like house keys you handed out. Every SaaS integration you've ever clicked authorize, well, that's a key. The dog walker, the neighbor, the contractor who finished the job back in 2023. Now, quick, how many of those keys are still out there? Who has them? When's the last time you changed your locks? Because that's the exercise. Look, most orgs have no idea. The token sits there valid long after anyone remembers granting it, and it doesn't need your password and often doesn't trip your MFA. It's a side door that's permanently propped open and labeled trusted. Well, we'll come back to what to do about it. Now, my favorite story of the week, because it's a beautiful piece of nasty engineering. Meet the pedit cow. It's an out-of-bounds write in the Linux kernel's packet editing action, and it corrupts shared page cache memory. A working public exploit showed up within a day of the CVE being assigned back on June 16th. Here's what makes it special, and I mean genuinely clever. The exploit never touches the file on the disk. It poisons the cached copy of Bensu, it's a root binary, in memory, and it injects a small payload and runs that altered version as root. And so your file integrity checks come back clean while a root shell is already open. So to put that in plain English, imagine a security guard whose their entire job is comparing everyone leaving the building against a photo on their badge. Well, the attacker doesn't forge the badge. He doesn't touch the badge. He reaches into the guard's memory and changes what guard thinks the photo looks like. The badge on file is pristine. The guard waves the intruder right through, completely confident because the records all match. That's page cache corruption. The file on disk is perfect. The copy the system is actually running, that's your problem. And how does an unprivileged user pull this off? Well, they spawn a user namespace which hands their namespace local network admin capability without any real privileges, and then use that to trigger the bug. No password, no admin rights, just a normal local account and a kernel that trusted the wrong thing. So here's the part that should bother us security practitioners. The fix landed quietly on a kernel mailing list back in late May, framed as just a routine data corruption patch, no CVE, no security advisory. So the exploitable detail was sitting in public for weeks before most of us had a CVE, a scanner rule, or a patch process that was pointed at it. And really, that's the modern end day. The bad guys read the same mailing list you don't have time to. The vulnerability was public before it was labeled as a vulnerability. Who needs to care right now? I mean, patched kernels are out you've got Red Hat 8, 9, and 10, Alma Linux, Debian 13. You patch and reboot. Debian 11 and 12 are still unpatched, and Ubuntu has acknowledged everything from 18.04 through 26.04 as vulnerable, even at June 25th. So prioritize your multi-tenant boxes. You've got your CI/CD runners, Kubernetes nodes, shared build servers, anywhere an untrusted human has a local shell. Look, if you can't patch immediately, you can stop the act pedit module from loading or restrict unprivileged user namespaces if your workloads can tolerate it. And the line I want you to write on a sticky note: any host that ran this exploit should be treated as, well, fully compromised, regardless of what your file integrity tooling says. Your tools will tell you everything's fine. Believe the threat model, not the dashboard. 2 more this week before we land the plane. ShinyHunters, still in business and still extremely busy. They claim to have compromised the Oracle PeopleSoft servers of more than 100 organizations, with most of the victims being colleges and universities. And in one message to an affected school, they claim to have stolen hundreds of thousands of student records, names, addresses, phone numbers, dates of birth, your ethnicity, GPAs, the works. Now, here's the Oracle detail that I need to highlight, because it's the kind of sentence that hides in an advisory and it ruins your quarter. Oracle's June 10th advisory urged immediate mitigations and noted that supported versions of People tools were the only ones tested for the flaw, though earlier unsupported versions were also assumed to be vulnerable. Assumed to be vulnerable. I mean, if you're running an unsupported version, you're not getting tested, you're not getting a clean answer, and you're definitely getting exploited. End-of-life software doesn't retire. It just stops getting bodyguards. And ShinyHunters, well, for anybody new out there, this is the same crew linked to AT&T, Santander, Ticketmaster, PowerSchool, Jaguar Land Rover, with researchers overlap into Scattered Spider and Lapsus. I mean, look, they survived a breach forums takedown back in January, and they did not slow down. This is a brand with better continuity planning than most enterprises. And just so you don't think it's only OAuth tokens, the open source side had its own week. Well, researchers flagged another evolution of the NPM supply chain campaign tying to ShinyHunters malware family with malicious packages. GitHub Actions, workflow abuse, and now spread into the Go ecosystem. The goal is always the same: harvest developer and maintainer credentials, and then use the stolen access to spread across registries and trusted developer workflows. So notice the theme this week: Klue, trusted integration; PeopleSoft, trusted enterprise software; NPM, trusted package in your build. Nobody kicked down the front door this week. They all walked in through something you'd already decided to trust. So, take a deep breath. Here's your whisper for the week. Trust is an attack surface. Every authorize you've clicked, every vendor connector, every dependency in your build, every supported version assumption, that's not infrastructure. That's a list of doors you've propped open and stopped looking at. And so here's 3 things you can actually do this weekend, and they're relatively small. 1, pull your list of OAuth grants and third-party app connections in your major SaaS platform. Start with Salesforce and your identity provider. Revoke anything that no one can explain in one sentence, because if you don't know who granted it or why, well, there's your answer. Second, if you run Linux, find your multi-tenant and CI/CD host. Check them against the pedit cow today. Patch and reboot where you can. And remember, the file integrity dashboard is really not your friend here. And finally, pick one vendor, just one, and ask the uncomfortable question. If they got popped tomorrow through their Salesforce or their connector, what of ours walks out the door? You don't need a full third-party risk program to ask one good question. That's it for the week. The kernel's running a binary that doesn't exist. The security industry got breached through a tool none of us heard of. And unsupported is just a fancy way of spelling exploited. I'm Elliott Franklin. Go change your locks. If this was useful, of course, we ask that you share it with one person on your team who still thinks an old OAuth token is harmless. See you next week.